while people are joining in, I will just start with introductions and a few housekeeping items. My name is Victoria Schuler. I'm a project manager for HR services with the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council. And here we have my colleague Owen. He will be helping us with the technical part. And also Martine Varekamp-Bos. I can never pronounce your last name, Martine.
You did good. You did good.
Martine is an immigration consultant operating out of Red Deer. So today we are doing another webinar of CARC QM webinar series on temporary foreign workers. I'm not sure you attended or not. We did 4 webinars back in December, January, and based on feedback that we received, there were a lot of questions on 2 additional topics that we thought would be useful. First is on LMIA Exempt Work Permits. What are the other options to bring a foreign worker to Canada and hire a foreign worker if you don't want to go with LMIA route? And there was also another topic on transitioning of temporary foreign workers in permanent residence. The second one is more complicated because it depends on each province. It's like where you are. So we decided to start with LMIA Exempt Work Permits first. And Martin here is to present. Since we don't have a lot of people, it's a meeting mode. So if you have any questions, feel free just putting a question in the chat or raising your hand, and we will just be going as Martin presenting. And those who are not able to register, if you know anyone, we will have a video recording available in a few days as well. Okay, great. Martine, would you like to start?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much for that, Victoria. I'm just going to share my presentation here. I trust that everybody can see this. I see a few familiar names on here, so that's really nice to see. And yeah, LMIA exemptions. I get a little bit nerdy and excited about looking at LMIA exemptions. Yeah, we're going to talk about that today. Just so everybody knows, or I'm going to operate under the assumption that everybody knows what an LMIA is and that everybody is somewhat familiar with NOC codes. If not, let me know. But otherwise, just in the interest of time, it's going to be a little bit easier to move through this when assuming that everybody has some, awareness of NOC codes. So yeah, LMIA exemptions, it can be a little bit difficult to apply them in the agricultural sector. But I think as an operator, owner or operator, it's very good to be aware of the exemptions that are out there. Just so that, when you're interviewing candidates, especially for more unique roles, your mind is kind of, going through these options as well. So let me see if I can move this slide forward. There we go. So that's just a quick overview of what we'll be discussing in the next hour here, and I'm hoping to leave some time at the end for questions as well, and maybe we can answer a few as we go through the presentation. We'll talk a little bit of where the LMIA exemptions come from in terms of where they're rooted in the immigration framework. We'll talk about just some of them because there are so many that we're just going to talk about some that I think will be interesting. We're going to talk about the employer portal, which from an employer perspective is a very important piece of LMIA exemptions. And we'll talk a little bit about port of entry applications and employer compliance. A little bit about me. I've been a regulated Canadian immigration consultant since 2009. I grew up on a dairy farm, and now my husband and I run a dairy farm. That's really where kind of my interest in foreign workers started. We currently don't have actually any foreign workers at the farm. All 3 of them that we had are now permanent residents, and they're still with us. I established immigration care 15 years ago, and we specialize in agricultural migration and employment-based immigration. There's a team of 6 of us at the office here. And we also just recently established Labor Solutions Canada, which is, and I see Tammy on the call here too. She is actually our international recruitment manager, launching this Labor Solutions Canada service that we have. And if anybody's interested in learning more about it, please reach out to me later. As a quick disclaimer before we go through this presentation, this content is time sensitive and consists of really general broad strokes information on the different programs and is not really meant as any kind of case specific advice. And that's not a picture of our farm, but you know, I thought the colors were pretty. And as I was saying to Owen, I kind of am ready for some spring colors, hence there's a lot of bright colors in this slide deck. So where are the LMIA exemptions rooted? And this, you know, as an immigration consultant, as a professional, this is important for me to understand where does it come from. So the temporary work of the work permits are really divided into two streams: the temporary foreign worker program and the international mobility program. So the temporary foreign worker program is where you require, you know, your LMIAs and is really focused on labor shortage and helping us with our labor shortage. The international mobility program is much more meant to, skill sharing and creating international mobility amongst countries and of higher skill levels. And these international mobility program consists of LMIA exemptions, and there's different codes that will kind of go through some of these codes for each scenario. So there's a specific set of requirements for each LMIA exemption, and there's really no consistency among them, and I will show you that later. In most cases, the employer is going to need an offer of employment to be submitted in an employer portal. That is an instant process. It's not with an LMIA where you submit the application and you have to wait for it to be approved. When you submit your offer, it becomes a formal record of the offer of employment. The vast majority of work permits under the International Mobility Program are also employer location and job specific, just as you're used to at the temporary foreign worker program. A big distinction is really with ag and low wage LMIAs is that as an employer, you are responsible for accommodation and transportation provisions. That generally does not apply in the International Mobility Program unless you, include it in your offer of employment as, as a benefit. The big distinction is that visa office assessing temporary foreign worker program applications is really, the job offer has already been vetted, that you're allowed to apply under that program if you have an LMIA's already, been established. So really visa officers just assess if the candidate meets the job requirements and the admissibility requirements. Whereas under the International Mobility Program, with the work permit application, the visa officer assessed does the situation fall under this LMIA exemption that you're requesting it on? Is the offer of employment genuine? And then the other pieces as well, like does the candidate meet the requirements of the job and is the candidate admissible? So they're a bit more comprehensive. And I would say the International Mobility Program is mostly geared towards skilled occupations. Let me see here. And this is where I geek out, and I'm going to see if this link will work, but this is really where the International Mobility Program is rooted, and even has the sections of the regulations as to where these different sections of international or LMIA exemptions stem from. So the big ones we'll talk about is really under the international trade agreements and the Canadian interest ones. And if you have other questions about any of these, please feel free to reach out to me later. I just want to see if this, if I can show this page to you. I'm on it, I would say probably just about every day, especially as I come across unique employment scenarios. This is the page where I go to, and I'll just scroll down just to give you an idea of each code is a different kind of LMIA exemption scenario. You can see there's tons here. These are all based on trade agreements. So there's a significant portion of all different kinds of LMIA exemption, from religious work, charitable work, to the ones that we'll be talking about here. So please keep that link. If you just Google LMIA exemption codes, you will get to this page. And we'll talk about the trade agreement. So Canada has, about 10 trade agreements with a significant human movement piece to it. Each trade agreement is unique, and some of them will have only categories for traders or investors. I know, and some of them have categories for basically all of these types of employment categories. The European trade agreement and the UK trade agreement are really focused on these contractual service suppliers and independent professionals. And we'll talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cusma one, because that's obviously a big one. And I think the category from where we're at today, the most interesting one would be the professionals and the technicians. And I think this, especially the technician piece, you know, I think has been overlooked by us, or is just, you know, it's and the information is hard to find. So the first trade agreement we'll talk about is Cusma. So that's the, you know, the Canada, US, Mexico agreement, and it's really meant for US and Mexican citizens wanting to come to Canada. There is a list of professions that that may be of interest, and I just picked out the scientist list here. The list is much longer, but you know, especially I see animal breeders using this this program, and it's important that the candidate applying meets this educational requirement. I've seen this quite a bit in hog operations, and it is important that the job duties reflect those of the actual NOC code that you're selecting. And I know that, you know, breeders, they fall under agricultural managers. I believe it's NOC 80020. The duration of the permit is typically 3 years and can be extended. There's, you know, some employer documentation that needs to be provided. And what is nice really for these types of applications is that Mexican and US nationals can apply for this work permit at the port of entry. So they can really, if you offer them the job, gather your documents, they can fly in within days and start the job. We'll talk a little bit more about port of entry applications as we go. I talked about this one already. Job duties must conform to the job duties of the profession, and it's really not meant to circumvent you know, the LMIA, and none of these LMIA exemptions are meant to circumvent the LMIA when the LMIA is truly the most appropriate choice. And again, the employer documentation and Canada documentation are important to show again that the job offer is genuine and that the candidate meets the requirements of the job. So this is an interesting one, I think, and we see quite a bit. This is one that I actually only just came across just very recently for the scenario that I actually have work permit applications pending under this F12 stream, or actually F52. And this is again the list for technicians under the international trade agreement Canada has with Colombia and Peru. And what is again the distinction here with Cusma is this is not only for citizens, it's actually also for permanent residents of those countries. It has a list of excluded professions and a list of included technicians. So these are the technicians. And the ones that I have used this for is actually the supervisors in food and beverage processing. And some other ones that are interesting, I think possibly in an agricultural setting would be, you know, a supervisor and, you know, like a mechanical trade for, you know, equipment operators or, you know, in that type of a setting. This particular, like when you click down that, you know, that long list that I showed you, if you click down on F12 and F52, it actually doesn't give you as much information as some of the other LMIA exemptions in terms of what the candidate needs. It doesn't really say that they need 4 years of experience or what kind of education they need. So in that scenario, I would make sure to just follow what the NOC says is required for that position, and maybe follow the lead from other similar LMIA exemption routes. A maximum duration of employment is not listed for this particular stream. I would probably kind of cap out at 3 years. You still want to make sure that it is a temporary job. Otherwise, the temporary work permit application may be refused if it shows more permanent intent than temporary intent. But if you can make a good case for a 5-year truly temporary position, you can try it. But generally, I stick to a 3-year max here. Another trade agreement that I think is interesting and is being overlooked a little bit is the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. You can see some of the countries that are participating in terms of, movement of people. And each country, actually, if you go onto the website again that I showed you at the beginning, each tab will have different professions. So it's not like you can just go and this works for all scenarios. What I have used here is the technicians and the supervisors in mechanical trade. This list does go on. This is just a screenshot of it. What's interesting here is that it's much more detailed in terms of what candidates need to get the work permit. And it really specifies that they must have, 2 years of study in this field and have 4 years of paid work experience as well. So this may not work in all scenarios, but if the candidate doesn't meet it, the work permit will be refused. So that's the type of documentation that you want to provide to make sure that it falls under this, meets these requirements. And then we'll move on to so we just touched on a couple of the trade agreements that I think are interesting and could work for an agricultural setting. We'll move on to like the Canadian interest LMIA exemptions. And this is just a short list. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. The significant benefit one can be interesting. We've used that one, the self-employed business owner, the intercompany transferee, and the ones that we'll touch on here, the Francophone Mobility Program and the International Experience Canada program. The significant benefit is interesting for very unique situations. I'll talk about one here that we've used it for. We were actually working with a fellow from Europe who was installing interiors for certain livestock barns that were manufactured abroad, and there was only really a handful of people that were trained in even installing these. So we were able to document how unique his skill set was, how unique the installation or, the intricacies of these, this type of equipment. And the candidate qualified for a significant benefit to Canada because, it helped advance the Canadian economy. It helped create employment opportunities, and it was a big piece of those ones is also transferring skills and knowledge to Canadians. It's a very, it really only applies in unique situations. But it's good to have on your radar in case, a unique situation does come up. And then some of you are probably aware of the partners and dependent children of skilled and low skilled workers. Again, ag ones are excluded from this, unfortunately, but for the skilled ones, it will work. So the Francophone Mobility Program was just revamped last year. Before it was really focused on habitual French speakers. Now it's really focused on candidates are to have a decent level of French and listening and speaking only. They're to be destined to work in Canada, anywhere in Canada, but not in Quebec. The intent is really to increase pockets of French-speaking individuals across the country. And the language of work does not need to be French. The offer of employment needs to be skilled for agricultural context. They actually have, when they revamped it, they actually did allow low-skilled occupations, but primary ag was excluded, unfortunately. So it would have to be your farm managers, your farm supervisors, or those types of positions that it would work for. And the validity period, again, isn't clearly specified. It just reflects the offer of employment. Again, I would stick to that maximum 3-year duration to show that it's a true temporary position, and extensions are possible. So before they really were looking at, are people habitual French speakers? Now they just need to either prove that they have a CLB level of 5 of speaking and listening. French-speaking candidates do not have to provide proof of language ability at the time of application. If it's clear that, they took their schooling in French, it's generally not needed. But then if they're not from, a habitual French-speaking country, they may be asked to do a test. An officer may request that. The International Experience Canada program, I'm assuming many of you are aware of this. It is really an agreement that Canada has currently with 36 specific countries to enhance key bilateral relationships and with key partners. It's meant for 18 to 30 or 35-year-olds, and they can get, and each agreement is slightly unique. So you have to kind of go back to what's permitted for each country. I know I deal with quite a few Dutch candidates, and they only actually go up to the age of 30, and 30 included, where many countries go between 18 and 35. And some will allow a 2-year working holiday permit, which is an open work permit, and some will only allow a 1-year. The same goes for the young professional. The difference really is that the working holiday is an open permit. From an employer perspective, it can be easy to get that permit, but if they found another opportunity, they may be more likely to leave. The young professional one is employer specific and is really meant for career development. The occupation generally should be skilled. However, IRCC or immigration will look at low-skilled occupation if it's in line with the candidate's post-secondary education. And again, not all countries allow participation in all 3 programs. So again, you have to look at which ones will be allowed. And then on top of the
one bag last week.
Oh, I think someone's got their mic on. I think we got it there. So yeah, those are the bilateral agreements. And then there's also, which can be used kind of on top of those bilateral agreements, is the recognized organizations. And I've just put out a couple here. A way to work the International Rural Exchange is probably a program that many of you will know, and it's a pretty great program. I wanted to point out like Go International and Swap Working Holidays. Because US citizens can participate actually in those countries, but US citizens cannot participate in these programs here. So if you have a US Canada wants to come work and you don't want to go through the LMIA process, you can go through Go International or Swap to bring them in. Please note that these agencies do charge a fee for their services, and they can provide additional services to candidates as well, like helping with arranging travel and those kinds of things. So the International Experience Canada program, it does work quite a bit different than many of the other work permit programs. Candidates create a profile and enter their name into a pool for either that working holiday or young professional permit. And then based on annual quotas, they may receive an invitation to apply. I just posted here what it was stating for Ireland yesterday. So there's a quota of 10,500. It still looks to be a lot of spots available in the program. Chances of receiving an invitation to apply are excellent, especially as we're getting towards the end of the year. You probably want to check if it's still feasible to get a permit under that program. And then there's other countries that are maybe less known countries that are participating in this program that have a really small quota. I'm thinking of like Costa Rica. Those programs usually fill up really quickly. And another thing that I thought I would just put in here is that it cannot be applied for from inside Canada. And really what I mean is it does not preserve status like a work permit extension does. So let's say somebody is on a working holiday, they've had their 1 year, now they're eligible for the 1-year young professional. They do need to ensure that they have a valid permit. Just having an application in process under this program, unlike basically any other program, does not maintain status. So that's an important thing to know. And candidate must have proof of health insurance upon entry. And the health insurance should really be valid for the duration of their stay. If they're showing up with a 3-month policy, the work permit will only be issued for 3 months. Yeah, generally I advise candidates just get, even if you're not sure if you're wanting to come for the full year or full 2 years, just get one for the full duration so you get the full permit. Like we said earlier, the employer portal is an essential piece of LMIA exempt work permits, as most of them are are employer specific permits still. The only open ones really are, those kind of bridging open work permits or partners accompanying a worker here or that working holiday. Everything else is essentially an employer specific permit. So to submit a formal record of the offer that you are providing as an employer, you have to create an employer portal. I put the link in here if anybody needs it. And really there you create your account, and here you can, submit an offer of employment or review previously submitted ones. Once you get into your account, there'll be 4 main sections that each have subsections. There's 10 subsections in total, where you can put in all the applicable information. I've highlighted some key sections here. So this is where you select this LMIA exemption title or code that you are applying under. And then in here, you have to provide a little bit of an explanation as to why the scenario matches. So often I pick a little bit of text from that website and stick it in there and say, this is how it matches. And other things, it honestly just creates a formal log of the job offer in terms of, the job duties and the pay. Unlike LMIAs, you actually can put in here like an annual wage instead of just hourly. So that makes that kind of unique. And yeah, I just put in a couple sections so that you get a bit of an idea of the type of questions. And then, so there's a $230 fee for employers to submit the offer of employment. And what happens then is you get an A number, and I've obviously blocked this out for confidentiality reasons. This A number is what you will need to provide to the foreign worker so that they'll have to stick that on their work permit application form. And an important thing, and that's why I put it at the top, as soon as you've paid your fee, print the receipt. It is, I would say, impossible or very difficult to get a copy of the receipt once you've clicked past that page. So get a copy of the receipt and also give that to the candidate. You'll also need to provide that as proof that the offer of employment has been submitted. I recommend that you take screenshots of all the 10 subsections of that offer and keep it as, for your records, because as we'll talk about later, you could be audited on it. So you really want to make sure that you have access to that offer and can go back to it to make sure that you are employing the candidate as you said you would. And an important piece also that I want to say in here is if you're not giving the candidate a full copy of the 10 pages that I was talking about, make sure that whatever is in that offer of employment is absolutely consistent with the employment contract or offer letter that you are presenting to the foreign candidate, so that the candidate is not going to run into an issue where the work permit might be refused because they're worried about the genuineness of the job offer because there's inconsistent information that was provided. So I want to talk about port of entry applications and the International Mobility Workers Unit. Especially as we're seeing work permit processing times going through the roof. And I posted this from just this week here. For Germany, work permit processing time is 63 weeks. It's it's truly become unworkable. And many European countries are seeing this. I would say that visa required countries, which were previously the longer ones in processing, are now a lot faster. Like I think South Africa was at 12 weeks, 13 weeks when I checked yesterday. So those are actually more workable than 63 weeks is simply not workable. And although I still see that agricultural applications do still seem to receive some priority processing, that is not consistently being applied. So in 63 weeks for a German citizen, I would say it's and as you're operating your farm, it doesn't work. So what's nice is that visa exempt nationals are eligible to apply at the port of entry. Which makes some people a little bit nervous, but really they can, if they've got their application package with them, they can fly into Canada and make their application on the spot. Depending on how busy it is at the port, they can really come out with their work permit, within half an hour or two. If it's really busy, it might take several hours. But and what I actually like, especially if it's a well-spoken candidate, they can actually speak to their own application. If the candidate struggles with English or French, this may not be the best way to do it. But if they are able to speak to their application and they really understand the job offer, officers seem to ask about the job offer the most. It's like, they'll be asking, what are you actually going to be doing in this job? And how did you meet this employer? I would say those are the most frequent questions. So to make sure that the candidate is prepared to speak to those questions would be important. Interesting to know is that they actually do not need an application form when they present at the port of entry to make that request for a work permit. I do recommend that they present a resume or a CV that clearly outlines their education and work experience, and have the education and work experience documentation with them along with the job offer information. But yeah, it should be processed on the spot, which is it can be a time saver when you're looking at 63 weeks here. And I'm really not seeing this being reined in at all. I want to just touch on flagpoling. I think we can talk about flagpoling for hours. Victoria, what do you think? It's a big topic, flagpoling. But we'll just touch on it. What is it? Who can do it? And when can they do it?
We should probably can come back to the employer portal as well. I'm not sure if this is the question, but I know that sometimes some employers used International Experience Canada several years ago. Somebody registered them in the employer portal, an agency. And now they are bringing somebody, they need to log in and it doesn't work, right? And here, whom shall I call? What shall I do? There is a process which is a bit complicated. Maybe you can touch base on that. I'm not sure whether anyone experienced that in the past.
Yeah, it is actually, and we can definitely talk about that before we go into that kind of flagpoling. The employer portal.
Just to mention about the flagpoling, also I would probably add that a lot depends on where physically you're going, right? Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba is different from Ontario, as from my experience. And I know some people would prefer just to call first to find out if they will be accepted. And there were some issues during COVID when nobody was encouraged to do flagpoling, but it's kind of slowly back now. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So just to go back to the employer portal, you can only really ever create an account once. If you've lost your login credentials, you can't just recreate an account. It will say that your account has been revoked. And then resetting your employer portal account can be a pain. There is an email address to send a request to. If you need that email address, let me know. But there's an email address you need to send a request for a PIN. And then when you get a PIN, you can reset your employer portal account. This can sometimes receiving this PIN can take a while, and this can be stressful, especially for young professional applications. The International Experience Canada Work Permit applications, once you receive an invitation to apply, you have 10 days to accept the invitation and then 20 days to submit the application. And after 20 days, if nothing was submitted, the application disappears. But if you as an employer need to provide this offer of employment number and you don't have it in time, it can be extremely stressful if you're not able to reset the account. Some things that I have done in the past to get around this is I put in a dummy offer of employment number, which was a 99999, and then added a note saying that we're working on resetting the employer portal account, and we'll send through the actual offer of employment number as soon as we get it, and that has worked. I actually don't know. I don't think we've helped any employers reset their employer portal account this year to see if it's a bit faster, but for a while there last year and the year before, it was sometimes taking weeks. So that is indeed stressful. So to kind of go,
10
oh,
business.
what
Right.
is it, sorry?
Yeah, and there is no number you can call, right? It's only
No.
email.
No, yeah, it's just email. It's very frustrating. Yeah, and that is really communicating with immigration. I think, and that's kind of on a separate note as well, has become very cumbersome. Calling the call center, the agents, the call center only have access to so much information, and really the only channel they want to use is web form. And even if you submit a web form, I was actually on a call yesterday where I think it said 30% of web form submissions are just, kind of being out there and not being responded to, not being matched to an application. So that's extremely stressful as well. So that's an advantage again of port of entry applications and flagpoling is that you are right there. You can make your request, you can speak to an officer. And so flagpoling, what is it? Flagpoling is typically for people inside Canada, either already on a work permit or here as a visitor, and they don't want to wait the processing times for in Canada processing to get a work permit, which is I want to say about 4 or 5 months right now. Although there are some ways to expedite those requests, if we can talk about that too. Another way is really to drive down to the Canada-US border and flagpole and be turned around and get the work permit also issued upon re-entering Canada. Canada and US have an agreement when people flagpole, Canada must accept the people back into Canada. But if they're not going to process your work permit application, they may give you a notice that you're expected to leave Canada within a week. That's kind of worst case scenario. Or they may say, look, like we're really busy here. You actually are eligible to apply for this type of work permit online. Go back to Red Deer and submit that application online. That is a possibility. But I do feel that there's more of an uptick on flagpoling and that it's going better. And each port of entry is different. I deal mostly with Coots here. I know that even in some of the in Ontario, some of the port of entries, they've only allowed flagpoling on certain days, certain times. So it's good to plan ahead. It is not for everyone. The flagpoling, it can be stressful. It can take a long time, but who can do it? So that's a big question. So basically, and there's conflicting information out there, but definitely visa exempt nationals can do it. Also the ones with those, they're called the ETA X countries, the 13 countries that were added to the ETA eligible countries back in June. They're also allowed to do that. And then if you have valid status in Canada, you are actually allowed to flagpole. There is a policy, if anybody ever needs it, it's an old policy from, I want to say 2009, that I've sent some of my candidates from visa required countries with to the port of entry so they can flagpole and show, and they have the documentation that the CBSA officer, the Canada Border Services Agency officer, has the authority, because that's what they will say, we don't have the authority to do this, actually has the authority to assess that application at the port of entry. If the candidate has already worked and wasn't allowed to do it, which of course is not okay. Flagpoling may not be the best situation. Officers are extremely suspicious of people already working without proper authorization, and their job really is to get information out of the candidates that they are not wanting to share. And many of these officers are extremely good at their job, and are very good at making candidates uncomfortable and spilling the beans, and that will have serious consequences. I actually had a candidate, and this was many years ago, that he was actually doing flagpoling with his LMIA, but he was waiting for the LMIA back when LMIA took so long. And he told me he hadn't, but he had already started working on this dairy, and the officer found this out by looking at the alarm settings on his phone. He saw 5 a.m. alarms on his phone. He's like, you are not a legitimate visitor with 5 a.m. alarms on your phone. And so those kinds of things, officers have a lot of authority. So you really have to be well prepared. Some people advise not to take the phone. If I were an officer, I would find that strange if somebody didn't bring their phone. People bring their phone everywhere. And I think a phone can also corroborate your story to a T and what you're saying is truthful. So then I think in that case, it can be your best friend. And then lastly, what I wanted to talk about on this particular slide here is the International Mobility Workers Unit. They issue LMIA exemption opinion letters that a candidate can take with them to make a port of entry work permit application only. This is, I would say, for a kind of a cut and dry, like the Francophone Mobility Program, for example, not needed. International Experience Canada, definitely not needed. But for like those significant benefit type of applications or those business owner applications, submitting what I call kind of almost like a pre-application to the International Mobility Worker Unit, they will assess your scenario and issue an opinion letter. With that opinion letter, the candidate can actually travel quite comfortably to the port of entry, still with their full application, but essentially the application has been pre-vetted. If you get a negative opinion, I would say it's not the end of the world. The negative opinions that I've seen are extremely detailed as to why a negative opinion was issued. So you can take that feedback and either strengthen the application, or you can decide not to proceed and still request an LMIA. They are issued to employers, not to the candidate. The service is free, and general turnaround time for these opinions about 2 weeks. So it's quite helpful, and in tricky situations we do use it. We'll move on to kind of our last main slide here, and that is employer compliance. The International Mobility Program is still subject to employer compliance and employer inspections. And I really wanted to, the second point is very important. Ensure that you see or have a copy of the work permit. And employers are deemed to know, it's written right in the immigration legislation, and employers deemed to know that somebody's authorized to work for you. You can't stick your head in the sand and say, well, he said he had an open work permit when he really didn't. I've seen this many occasions, and some foreign nationals, they do want to present their light or their situation in a better light, and will say, oh yes, I have a work permit. But if you've not seen it, you simply do not know if that person is authorized to work for you. Again, you want to make sure that you meet the conditions of the work permit in terms of job location and length, and again, as per the offer of employment. If you need to set up medical insurance, depending on provincial requirements, and if it was listed on your offer of employment, that'll need to be taken care of still. Again, you will be subject to federal and provincial employment and recruitment laws. I highlight this next one to make sure the workplace is free of abuse. This this was an update that they did, I want to say 1.5 years or maybe 2 years ago. And I know that CARC in their HR toolkit has a workplace free of abuse policy. I've actually used that for our farm as well, and I've kind of updated sections and posted it on our notice board and circulated it. But as an employer, you need to make real efforts to create a workplace that's free of abuse. You also want to make sure that you are available to answer any questions or with any documents if you're subject to an inspection. Another one that I highlighted here is that you are required to provide the foreign worker, whether they come in under the International Mobility Worker Program or under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program with an LMIA, you are required to provide them with a copy of their employment contract. And just as with the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, you are to keep records for 6 years. And the LMIA, or sorry, the inspections are done by the same agency that would do them for LMIAs. Before we go into questions, some key takeaways. Like, well, don't forget about LMIAs. LMIA exemptions are not the answer to everything, but I really, I think it's good for you to have, some of these scenarios in the back of your mind. If something comes across your path, you're like, oh, there might be a better way. And, agricultural LMIAs right now aren't the worst, I would say. They're processed pretty quickly. We're still under that advertising suspension, which I don't know if that'll be extended past June again. But there are the additional requirements. They got housing inspections and travel provisions that you wouldn't have with an LMIA exemption scenario. And you're still going to be subject to compliance in the same sense as per the offer of employment. You really want to review the specifics of the LMIA exemption, each exemption code, and you want to review it again when you're submitting it. Tweaks are made all the time. Port of entry applications are, when eligible, or flagpoling are a good way to kind of work around processing times. And again, in terms of employer compliance, in a perfect scenario, I encourage employers to do self audits and really follow that employment contract to the T. And one thing that I actually didn't mention earlier that I had intended to is for these LMIA exemptions, people often ask me, do I have to pay the prevailing wages on the job bank website? And some of the LMIA exemptions will specifically mention that, but many don't. However, I still use it as a guide and will advise employers to stay in range of that median prevailing wage. Again, it helps with the genuine factor. If you're going to be employing a manager, but you're paying the minimum wage, that doesn't appear very genuine. So that's, again, I had wanted to mention that earlier on. You don't have to follow the job bank prevailing wage for all of them, but I think you want to use it as a guide.